But there's an interesting article that you found from Max Lugavere, right, from Genius Life?
Yeah, he shared it, and that's how I found it. But then it's from PubMed, and it was on, let's see if I can find the title of this. So it's called Orthorexia Nervosa and Eating Disorder Symptoms in Registered Dietitian Nutritionists in the United States. And it was a study that they did. This was back from 2017, but it just resurfaced. So that's why we're talking about it, because it also ties back into this topic. Basically, the conclusion was that both orthorexia nervosa, which is like an obsession with eating healthy, and eating disorders in general are more common among registered dietitian nutritionists than they are the general population, which is a very interesting find.
And I think what was the conclusion of it? It was the percentage of people that admitted to orthorexia nervosa? Yeah,
so it was an electronic survey, and it was sent out to 2,500 RDs, but they got 636 responses, and of that sample, 49.5% were at risk of orthorexia nervosa, and 12.9% were at risk of an eating disorder.
Okay, this is super interesting. I know which direction I want to take this conversation so we're just going to call that 50%. 50% of registered dietitians surveyed claim that they are at risk of orthorexia nervosa. Now, orthorexia is very real, and I've experienced it for many years. I think it took me probably until COVID and working with my functional medicine doctors at Wild Health. Wild Health is fantastic. I have a great doctor, Dr. Mallon, and Julia is my health coach, and we've had really long, deep conversations. And I don't think I quite understood the depth of my own orthorexia. It was really, really problematic. And it's interesting because anytime you take on any dietary we just got to call it what it is. It's dogma. No matter who you are, like when you're in this industry, you have a dietary dogma. As we know, like my good buddy Paul Saladino has a dietary dogma. Vegans have a dietary dogma. Whole30 people have a dietary dogma. And then the registered dietitians, also what I would call the evidence-based society, or whatever, evidence-based groups, they have a dogma as well, which is just like whatever the medical community tells you is correct. So you have this issue with registered dietitians. Diana Rogers is a great resource for this because she is a registered dietitian, and she talks openly about how basically everything she learned in school was garbage. And then she did a hospital internship as well, and she was a dietitian at a hospital, and she's feeding people Jell-O and toast and bananas and literally applesauce and shit. And they're trying to recover from like really serious stressors on the body. And she basically said that becoming a registered dietitian, the education she got told her exactly what not to do to get people healthy. And that's so twisted. And there's another quote from somebody, I can't remember who, but basically he's talking about the American Dietetics Association. The plan that the American Dietetics Association or Diabetes Association, whatever it's called, lays out is basically a recipe for type 2 diabetes. It's insane. So the Diabetes Association that's in charge of most of the information, or like if you ever look at like diabetes, there's a diabetes magazine, and somebody took like all the covers of diabetes magazines, and every single one was like a piece of cake, a piece of pie, baked goods, bread, all this thing, trying to teach you how to eat junk food in moderation when you have diabetes. They're basically a marketing funnel for big pharma. They're taking people and destroying their lives in nutrition, and then they're getting on metformin and insulin and all these things. It's as if they're literally feeding patients to big pharma, right? But anyway, so the registered dietitians things, they get it stuck in their head that they have to eat a certain way. And registered dietitians are very good at the calories in, calories out in moderation model. And we know from all of the research that hyperpalatable foods in moderation do not work. What I think is happening with the registered dietitians is they're trying to manage their body image, doing the things that they tell their clients to do, and it doesn't work. So you have these people that I think this was in the article as well, where it says they're really struggling with their exercise and their body image. This is a real problem for them because you don't want to be a fat registered dietitian. So if you're doing everything you're telling your clients to do and you're getting fat, there are a lot of fat registered dietitians. What happens? Now you're going to have orthorexia. And you're going to start thinking every bite of food I put in my mouth is going to make me fat. If I eat too many calories, I'm going to be fat. So now you're at a chronic caloric deficit and you're trying to eat like healthy whole grains in moderation. And those hyperpalatable foods are breaking your metabolism. And now you're completely orthorexic. You're trying like hell to follow the registered dietitian dogma. and your health is falling apart. That's what I think is happening, is because of the foods that they're including, they're not getting the results they want, and it's leading them to become orthorexic.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the same food system that is keeping people sick and on pharmaceuticals is teaching registered dietitians and nutritionists the information that they then regurgitate to their clients or their patients. So I think the whole system is really just at fault here. And I could only imagine the frustration and the feeling of helplessness that these registered dietitians, and it's not all, of course, but the dogmatic ones, I think, especially, they must feel when they aren't getting results, and in turn their clients or their patients aren't getting any results either. It must be super frustrating and just, upsetting. So I can imagine that definitely messes with your head a lot and ends up messing with your whole approach to nutrition and health. And it's really sad, actually.
It's super sad. And it's like, again, people think I'm anti-doctor or anti-nutritionist or anti-registered dietitian or whatever. That's not the case. Like, I really think that these are good people. Yeah. They got into this for the same reasons you and I did. I got into this by accident. I was just playing music, but like, I got to a point where I was like, people need this information. I want to share this with them. Those people have the same thought. They go, so many people come to me and they're just like, hey, I really want to help people the way you do. Where do I go? And I'm like, I don't really know. I mean, you have some education now and some credentials. I have some credentials, and the credentials that I got, I wouldn't fucking tell anybody to do that stuff. Especially when I went to my specialist in sports nutrition and specialist in fitness nutrition, are two different certifications, and it's just all calories in, calories out, carb loading before fitness and all that. I don't teach anybody any of that shit, but the credentials work for me. So it's this crazy thing where people are in it for the right reason, but there's so many people that went and took those same courses that I didn't do the necessary self-directed study to really figure out how things work. They have no experience with clients at all, and they just go out into the world and they go, here's what I learned in my textbook. What breaks these people's brains is if I'm having an argument with an evidence-based person or a PhD or whatever the fuck, right? It becomes this thing of like, when were your textbooks published? Tell me that. Most people, it's like literally 17 to 20 years ago that these textbooks were published, and super behind the studies, the current up-to-date studies. And two, who paid for your textbooks? Most people cannot answer that question. So I use like Harvard Medical School as an example of this. Multi-million-dollar buildings don't just pop up in prime real estate in Cambridge, Boston for $0. Let's put a medical school here out of the goodness of our hearts. That doesn't happen. It's paid for by pharmaceutical companies and big food companies. They are paying for your medical school, straight up. They decide the information that goes in the textbooks. Anybody that can't see that, I mean, the conversation ends there, and I just have to, I can't talk to you about this. Like, but it becomes this thing of like, if you're graduated from Harvard Medical School, you want to look at a guy like Justin and be like, that guy's a fucking quack. Don't listen to him, because I'm an MD and he doesn't know what he's talking about. But if we sit and had a 2-hour conversation like this and we start talking biochemistry, I'm going to make that guy look real dumb in the realm of nutrition. In the realm of medicine, he's going to make me look like a kindergarten kid. I know nothing about what medicine is good for what symptom or whatever. That's his whole thing. If you break your femur, let that dude reset it. I'm not going to reset your femur. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm not going to stitch you up from a stab wound. I'm not that guy. But when it comes to nutrition and epigenetics and all these things, getting people metabolically flexible, no doctor's going to tell you how to do that, except the doctors that are MDs and then went on to study nutrition on their own. So it's just it's a completely broken system. It's twisted.
Yeah. But luckily, we're seeing more and more doctors and nutritionists and registered dietitians that are going beyond what they learned in medical school and doing their own research. And I think that's what it comes down to is like, don't stop learning. And just because someone says something is this way, it like doesn't mean that's truth. You should always keep learning and keep doing your own research and coming to your own conclusions based on what's working and what isn't, and looking at numbers. Like that's, I forget, I heard this on one of your podcasts somewhere, but I don't remember actually, but they were talking about like only getting advice from someone who's healthier than them, essentially. So it's like, taking advice from a nutritionist or from a medical doctor who you can clearly tell is not healthy is probably a red flag. Like, it's just asking questions and having critical thinking.
Absolutely. And that's most of the medical community. Because if you think about it, right, we talked about this earlier, like 88% of Americans have metabolic dysfunction by mainstream medical standards, which means by my standards, probably 95% of people, which means most of the living doctors in America probably have metabolic dysfunction. I'm not taking nutrition advice from them. I'm just not going to do it. That's insane. You know, so I don't know how to fix that. I don't know what the answer is or anything, but it's I mean, it's a systemic problem. The whole thing is so broken. And then you get in this place too, like the Paul Saladinos of the world that go out as medical doctors and say like, hey, maybe we should only eat meat. And people just slaughter him. They just come out of the woodworks with their credentials and they're just completely rude and mean to him. And it's like, it's terrible. They just can't open their minds to any kind of outside thinking. So an important point that I try to tell people is throughout all of history, if you take when we were smoking cigarettes in doctors' offices and smoking cigarettes on airplanes, when we thought that the earth was flat and all the planets, including the sun, revolved around the earth, when we thought these things were true, those were the top scientists in the history of mankind. Always. They were at the top of their game. They were the smartest humans to ever live in all of human evolution. They were the smartest people in history that thought that shit. And then someone comes along and says that the earth revolves around the sun, and they would put them to death, literally, for it. You know what I'm saying? It's crazy. So to think that in 2020 right now, we're the only time in history where our smartest scientists in the world are actually correct. It would be the only time in history that shit is actually correct. Think about that. We've never been correct, ever. We've never been correct. We stack information on top of each other and we learn more things. We learn germ theory and all this stuff comes out. And we learn how to make processed foods to help people not starve to death. But all along the way, every time we have some technological breakthrough in medicine and nutrition, we fuck things up. And we don't know till 40 years later that we fucked things up. So to think that we have it all figured out right now is the ultimate ego pissing contest. Just it's little children running the show. So any evidence-based people out there listening to this, like, don't be a fucking child. Just open your mind. That's end rant.